The lawyer read my brother's name first, and the room changed before anyone said a word. Cruz and Holt got the beach house in Miami, $3 million of white walls, glass balconies, and ocean air. Then the lawyer read my name, and I got the Sunfall Motor Court, an abandoned motel on the Texas Gulf Coast with boarded windows, a cracked swimming pool, unpaid taxes, and a city warning taped to the office door. My brother smiled like God had personally signed the papers in his favor. My fiancé looked at me like I had just become a problem he did not want to marry. And by the end of that same week, he called me a burden, told me my parents must have known what I was worth, and walked out of my life. So I drove alone to Salt Lake, Texas, to see the dead motel everyone was laughing at. What I found inside room 9 was not money. It was worse than money. It was the one thing a powerful developer, my brother, and half the county had been trying to get for years. And once they realized I had it, every person who had pitied me suddenly wanted to sit at my table. Welcome back. This is the kind of story where nobody wins by screaming. They win because they stay calm long enough to read the paperwork. If you believe quiet people can still be dangerous when the truth is on their side, stay with me, because the motel they called worthless was the only door standing between greed and everything my mother had spent her life protecting. My name is Savina Holt, and I was 34 when my mother died. My father, Orlan Holt, had been gone for 6 years by then, but my mother, Dovie, had kept breathing life into the spaces he left behind. She was not loud. She was not the kind of woman who made speeches at dinner tables or told people her pain in long, dramatic sentences. She kept receipts in labeled envelopes, sent birthday cards 3 weeks early, carried peppermints in her purse, and remembered every person who had ever needed a place to sleep. I used to think she was soft because she forgave too much. Later, I learned softness is not the same as weakness. Sometimes softness is just strength that refuses to turn ugly. My brother Cruson, who everyone called Crew, never understood that. To him, love was measured in property value, square footage, views, and whether people looked impressed when he named a price. He was 7 years older than me, and he had spent his whole life walking into rooms like he had already won them. The will reading happened in an office in San Antonio with dark wood walls and quiet lighting that made everybody look richer than they were. Mavis Quillen, my parents' estate lawyer, sat at the head of the long table with a stack of documents in front of her and a careful expression on her face. Crew sat across from me in a navy suit that looked expensive enough to have its own insurance policy. His wife, Winta, sat beside him with her hand on his wrist, her diamond bracelet bright under the lights. Penn Ralston, my fiancé, sat next to me. But even before the reading began, I could feel distance growing between us. He had come in holding my hand. By the time Mavis cleared her throat, his fingers had loosened. Mavis started with the personal things. My mother's jewelry box, my father's watch, a few small accounts. Then she moved to the properties. Crew got the Miami beach house. She said the number plainly, without drama, but the number carried its own weather. $3 million free and clear. White stucco near the water, 5 bedrooms, a private pool, and a roof deck my mother had only visited twice because she said the place felt too shiny to sit down in. Crew closed his eyes for half a second, like a man receiving a blessing. Winta's shoulders dropped with relief. Penn went very still beside me. Then Mavis turned a page. To my daughter, Savina Holt, she read, we leave the Sunfall Motor Court in Salt Lake, Texas, together with all attached parcels, recorded access interests, improvements, fixtures, files, records, and remaining personal property located on site. Nobody spoke at first. The silence lasted only a second, maybe less, but I felt every inch of it. Then Crew laughed. Not a big laugh. Not cruel enough to be honest. Just a small, relieved laugh that told me he had been afraid of getting the wrong thing and had just discovered he did not have to be afraid anymore. The motel? He said, leaning back. Mom left you that hurricane museum? Winta gave him a look, but it was too late. The words were already in the room. Penn's face changed. I watched him try to hide it, but disappointment has a shape. His jaw tightened. His eyes went down to the table. He did not look at me. I knew the Sunfall Motor Court. Everyone in my family knew it. My father bought it before I was born, back when old highway motels still had a kind of romance to them. Orange doors, horseshoe parking lot, neon sun sign, little office with a bell on the counter. By the time I was 15, the interstate had pulled traffic away from Saltwick, storms had eaten the roof twice, and the place became more repair bill than business. After Hurricane Laurel, the city marked it unsafe. My father boarded half the rooms. My mother kept paying the taxes. Nobody understood why. Crew used to call it Dovey's favorite mistake. I never laughed when he said it. My mother always changed the subject. Mavis finished the reading. She explained that the distribution came from a trust my parents had created years earlier. She said the documents were clean, signed, witnessed, and updated after my father's death. Crew asked 2 or 3 questions about the beach house, mostly tax questions, the kind a person asks when he is already spending money in his head. I asked nothing. I was too busy watching Penn. He had not touched my hand since the motel was mentioned. When we walked out into the parking lot, Crew caught up to me. "Don't look so wounded, Sav," he said. "You always liked sad little projects." He said it with a smile like a brother teasing a sister, but his eyes were bright with victory. "Maybe you can turn it into one of those vintage places, put up string lights, sell coffee to people who pretend rust is charming." Winta murmured his name, but he ignored her. Mom knew what she was doing. I got the house that needed someone responsible. You got the place that needed someone emotional. I looked at him for a long moment. I wanted to say something sharp. I wanted to remind him that he had borrowed money from our mother twice in 3 years and called it temporary pressure. I wanted to ask how responsible he felt when he forgot her last birthday and sent flowers after midnight from an app. But grief had made my body heavy, and I did not trust myself to speak without breaking. So I said, "Congratulations on the house, Crew." That was all. He hated it. Not because it was rude, but because it did not give him anything to push against. Penn waited until we were back at my apartment before he let himself be honest. He stood in my kitchen with his tie loosened and his face hard in a way I had never seen. "I thought they were leaving you the San Antonio property," he said, "or at least half the investment account." I took off my coat slowly. "They left me the motel." He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Savina, that place is a liability. It's probably full of mold and code violations. You don't inherit a place like that. You inherit a lawsuit." I told him maybe there was a reason. He looked at me like that was the saddest sentence I could have chosen. "A reason? Your brother got a $3 million beach house. You got a dead motel on a sinking road. The reason is obvious." I remember the hum of the refrigerator. I remember the grocery list stuck under a magnet shaped like a lemon. I remember Penn turning away from me and rubbing his forehead as if my inheritance had personally embarrassed him. He had a real estate licensing exam he kept putting off, a business plan he kept rewriting, and a habit of calling my steady job temporary, even though it paid the rent when his plans did not. I worked as a property records researcher and permit consultant. I found old deeds, title problems, missing easements, boundary mistakes, and the kind of paperwork developers only cared about when it stopped them from building something expensive. Penn used to joke that I made a living reading dead people's handwriting. That night, he said my parents must have known I would be comfortable with dead things. That was the first sentence that truly landed. The second came 10 minutes later after I told him I was going to Saltwick to inspect the motel myself. "You are not thinking clearly," he said. "You are acting like a little girl trying to prove her parents loved her." I told him not to talk to me like that. He stared at me, and whatever mask he had been holding finally slipped. "Fine," he said. "Then I'll say it clearly. I can't build a life with someone who thinks an abandoned motel is a blessing. Your brother got the future. You got a burden. And I am tired of carrying burdens." I did not cry. That matters to me, maybe more than it should. I had cried plenty in my life, in bathrooms and parking lots, and once in the canned goods aisle of a grocery store after my father died and I saw his favorite soup. But I did not cry in front of Penn Ralston. I took off my engagement ring, set it on the kitchen counter, and pushed it toward him with 2 fingers. It made a tiny sound against the tile. Small sounds can end big lies. Penn looked at the ring, then at me. "You'll regret this," he said. I picked up my coat. "Not as much as I'd regret marrying a man who waited for a will to decide what I was worth." I drove to Saltwick 2 days later in my old gray Subaru with a box of documents, a change of clothes, a flashlight, and my mother's house key on a ring, even though her house was empty now. Saltwick sat low on the Texas Gulf Coast, where the air tasted like salt and old metal. It was not the beach town people put on postcards. It was shrimp boats, rusted fences, faded churches, gas stations with hand-painted signs, and streets that flooded when the sky got moody. The closer I got, the flatter the land became. Marsh grass leaned in the wind. Telephone poles stood crooked along the highway. The sky opened wide enough to make a person feel both free and exposed. The Sunfall Motor Court stood on the edge of town, half a mile from the old ferry road. I almost missed it because the sign had gone dark years ago. Sunfall was still there in cracked yellow letters, but the painted sun behind it had peeled until it looked more like a bruise. The office windows were boarded. The pool was empty except for rainwater, leaves, and a plastic chair lying on its side like it had given up during a storm and never been moved. 12 rooms curved around the parking lot. Orange doors, most of them faded to a tired peach. Room 9 had a newer lock than the others. I noticed that immediately. My father used to say the thing that does not match is usually the thing telling the truth. A city notice was taped to the office door. Unsafe structure. Review pending. I stood there with the wind pulling at my hair and felt a strange embarrassment, as if the building itself knew I had been ashamed of it before I ever touched the door. I expected rot. I expected abandonment. But when I put the key in the office lock, it turned smoothly. Someone had oiled it. Inside, dust lay over everything, but not evenly. The front counter had been wiped within the last few months. The old guest bell was polished clean on top. A calendar from 3 years earlier hung behind the desk, still turned to September. There was a small vase on the counter with dried bluebonnets in it, brittle and gray with age. My mother had loved bluebonnets. She used to say they proved Texas could be gentle when it wanted to be. I walked the office slowly. There was an old reservation book, a coffee maker, a cabinet of yellowed maps, and a framed photograph of the motel from the 1970s when the pool was full, the sign was bright, and families in wide collars smiled beside station wagons. My parents stood in the photo too, young and sunburned, my father with one arm around my mother's shoulders. Behind them, near the edge of the picture, was a narrow road leading away from the back of the motel toward the marsh. I turned and looked through the dirty rear window. The road was still there, partly hidden by grass, blocked by a chain and a sign that read, "Private access. Do not remove." I did not know yet that the whole fight of my life was going to be about that road. The first person to visit me was Sula Keene. She arrived in a green pickup with one white door and a dashboard covered in old receipts. She was somewhere in her 70s, thin as a fence rail, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that looked like they had never missed a lie. I was standing near the pool when she walked up without asking permission. "You're Dovey's girl," she said. Not a question. I told her I was. She looked me up and down, then looked at the motel. "Took you long enough." I almost laughed because I had no better answer. Sula had worked at the Sunfall when I was a child, though I barely remembered her. She had cleaned rooms, handled late-night check-ins, patched curtains, and from the sound of it, done every other job my parents needed without ever putting it on paper. "Your mama kept this place breathing," she said as we stood in the office. "People thought she was sentimental. People are fools." She ran one finger over the guest bell. "Did she ever tell you what this place was after the tourists stopped coming?" I shook my head. Sula's mouth tightened. Then she was still protecting people even from the story. She did not explain right away. Instead, she asked if I had opened room 9. I told her the key I had did not fit. Sula looked toward the old neon sign in the office window. "Your daddy liked hiding things in plain sight," she said. She walked over, lifted the lower metal frame of the sign, and pulled out a small brass key taped inside a strip of black cloth. My mouth went dry. "How did you know that was there?" She handed it to me. "Because Orland told me if you came alone, I should show you where to look. If Crew came, I should tell him the place was condemned and go home." The words hit harder than I expected. If you came alone? Not if the family came, not if a lawyer came, if I came. My father had been dead 6 years, but suddenly I could feel him in that dusty office, practical and stubborn, setting up a test without calling it one. Room 9 smelled like cedar, dust, and old paper. The other rooms were ruined in the normal ways, sagging mattresses, stained ceilings, broken lamps. But room 9 had been kept dry. The bed was gone, the carpet had been pulled up. Metal shelves lined one wall, and against the back sat a gray filing cabinet with a combination lock. Sula pointed to a patch of wall above it where the paint looked slightly cleaner. "Your mother kept a picture there," she said. "Took it down the last time I saw her. Cried while she did it." I tried my mother's birthday on the lock. Nothing. My father's birthday. Nothing. Then I tried the year the motel opened. 1961. The lock clicked. Inside the cabinet were files wrapped in plastic, each labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. Old Ferry Road, South Marsh Tract, shelter logs, Strake offers, Holt Trust copies. One envelope sat on top, cream-colored, with my name written across it. Not Cruz, mine. My hands shook as I opened it. Savina, my mother had written, if you are reading this in room 9, then you came to see the place for yourself. I am sorry I did not explain sooner. Your father believes some truths are safer when they are quiet. I believed quiet truths can still hurt the people who deserve to know them. We argued about that until the end. So I am leaving you both the place and the choice. The motel is not valuable because of its rooms. It is valuable because of the road behind it. But before you decide what to do, read the shelter logs. Read them first. Money will speak loudly. Let people speak first. I sat on the bare floor of room 9 and read until the sun moved across the broken blinds. The old ferry road behind the motel had been created before the county changed its coastal maps, before the resort parcels were divided, before the marsh became a battlefield between people who wanted to protect it and people who wanted to build over it. The Sunfall Motor Court owned the only recorded access strip wide enough for commercial construction traffic to reach the South Marsh Tract, hundreds of acres near the water that a developer had been quietly buying through shell companies for years. Without that road, the tract was beautiful but trapped. With that road, it could become a luxury resort, marina, golf course, private villas, whatever men with clean shoes and dirty plans could dream up. There was more. The original deed from 1961 had a restriction attached to the access road. My father had underlined it in red pencil. The road could be used for lodging, emergency refuge, public safety access, and ordinary motel operations. It could not be transferred for private resort development without written release from the motel owner and county approval. I read that line 5 times. Then I opened the folder marked Strake Offers, Cordell Strake. I knew the name before I knew the man. Anyone who worked in Texas property records knew Strake Coastal Group. They bought tired land from tired people, promised jobs, fought restrictions, and left towns divided between hope and regret. The first offer letter was dated 12 years earlier. Then another, then another. The numbers climbed. 200,000, 500,000, 1.2 million. Then after my father died, 5 million for road control and development cooperation. My mother had written one word across the last offer in blue ink. No. I should have felt rich. Instead, I felt watched. Not by Sula. She had left me alone after telling me to read. Not by anyone outside. The motel was quiet except for wind pushing sand against the door. But the papers themselves seemed to watch me. My parents had left me the thing everyone mocked, and that thing was not a broken business. It was a locked gate. Whoever controlled the Sunfall controlled whether Cordell Strake's resort lived or died. I stayed at a small inn that night because the motel rooms were not safe to sleep in. I spread the files across the bed and worked the way I worked for clients, only slower, because this time every document had my family's fingerprints on it. I pulled county records online. I checked parcel maps, old plats, tax histories, easement language, shell company purchases, planning board minutes. By midnight, the shape of it was clear. Strake Coastal Group had spent years acquiring the South Marsh Tract, piece by piece. They had investors, they had preliminary designs, they had political support from people who liked ribbon cuttings, but they did not have clean access. The old ferry road was the straight path, the dry path, the cheap path, and the Sunfall Motor Court owned the lock. At 2 a.m, I found my brother's name. Not on the deed. Crew was never that careless. His name appeared in an email printed and tucked into the Strake file. It was from a consultant to my mother, forwarded by mistake years earlier. Crew had introduced one of Strake's men to a banker in Miami. Another document showed that a limited company connected to Crew had received a consulting advance from a Strake affiliate 18 months before my mother died. It was not proof of a crime by itself, but it was enough to tell me that Crew had known the motel mattered. Maybe he did not know everything. Maybe he knew only enough to expect he would control it one day. But he knew more than he had pretended in that San Antonio office when he laughed. The next morning, my phone rang before breakfast. Crew. I watched his name on the screen and let it ring twice. When I answered, his voice was warm in a way that made my stomach turn. Hey, Sav, just checking on you. Winta said you drove down to Saltwick. Crew had not checked on me in years unless he needed a signature or wanted me to explain something from a property tax notice. I said I was fine. That place is probably worse than we remember, he said. Listen, don't get overwhelmed. I've been thinking. Maybe we should treat it as a family asset. I can help you unload it before the city starts fining you. I looked at the files spread across the in-desk. That is generous. He laughed, but carefully. I'm serious. I might know people who would take it off your hands. I asked what kind of people. He paused half a second too long. Developers, cleanup guys, whoever. You don't need that headache. There are moments when someone confirms what you already know, and instead of feeling surprised, you feel cold. I told him I would think about it. He told me not to take too long. After we hung up, I sat there with my coffee going cold and understood that my brother had laughed at me only because he thought I did not know where the real value was. He had not been celebrating his beach house. He had been celebrating my ignorance. Penn called that afternoon. I did not answer. He texted instead, "Heard you're in Texas. Hope you're being realistic." I stared at the message for a while, then deleted it. Not because it did not hurt, it did, but some pain becomes useful when you stop asking it to explain itself. Over the next 3 days, I worked like a woman trying to catch a storm in a jar. I met Palmer Joss, the county records clerk, a narrow-shouldered man with kind eyes and a voice so soft people probably underestimated him every day. He took one look at the old deed and whistled under his breath. "Haven't seen this language in a long time," he said. He pulled books from the archive that smelled like dust, glue, and old rain. Together we found the original road dedication, the restriction, 2 county acknowledgments after hurricanes, and a forgotten emergency use filing from the year Hurricane Elian flooded half of Saltwick. My mother had filed it. Dovie Holt had turned the Sunfall into a temporary shelter after storms, and the county had recognized the access road as part of a local emergency route. Nobody had talked about it because nobody cared until a luxury resort needed the same road. Then I read the shelter logs. That was when the story stopped being about money for me. The logs were not official. They were notebooks, years of them, written mostly by my mother and sometimes by Sula. Names, dates, room numbers, small notes. Family of 4, truck flooded, room 3, no charge. Woman with 2 children, asked not to use real name, room 7, called cousin in Corpus. Elderly couple from trailer park, power out, room 2. Fisherman injured in storm, waited for ambulance, office couch. Young mother afraid husband would find her, room 9, left before sunrise, cried when Dovie packed sandwiches. I read page after page until my eyes burned. My mother had not kept a dead motel alive because she was sentimental. She had kept it because people kept needing it. The Sunfall had been a place where people could disappear for one night without being asked to perform their suffering. A place where stormwater, bad luck, violence, fear, and poverty met a clean towel, a locked door, and my mother's quiet hands. I thought of Crew calling it Dovie's favorite mistake. I thought of Penn calling it a burden. Then I looked at the names in those notebooks and felt shame move through me, because for 1 week I had almost believed them. Cordell Strait called me on the 4th day. He did not introduce himself like a man hoping I had heard of him. He introduced himself like a man certain I had. His voice was smooth, friendly, and polished flat by years of getting what he wanted. "Ms. Holt, I understand you are reviewing your new property in Saltwick. I would love to discuss a solution that benefits everyone." I asked who everyone was. He chuckled. "The town, your family, you. My group has resources to restore value where others see decay." I looked through the office window at the cracked pool and the grass pushing through the parking lot. "Is that what you want to restore?" I asked. "The motel?" Another pause. He was too experienced to sound annoyed. "I want to restore opportunity." That was the kind of sentence men like him used when the truth was too ugly to wear daylight. He offered to meet in person. I declined. He offered to send a proposal. I told him to send it to my attorney, though at that point I had not hired one. He said, still gentle, "You should know your brother is open to a more practical family conversation." There it was, Crew again, not even hiding in the shadows, standing close enough to the money to get warm. That evening I called Mavis Quillen. She reminded me at the start that she had represented my parents' estate and that I would need independent counsel for any personal fight. But she could explain documents. She could tell me what the trust had transferred, what it had not, and whether my parents had left any instructions I had not yet understood. I told her about the road, The restriction, the strike offers, Crew's possible connection. Mavis was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. Not emotional. Sharper. Your mother asked me once what would happen if a property was more important for what it prevented than what it earned. My throat tightened. What did you tell her? I told her prevention is hard to appraise, but it can be protected if the owner is willing to give up profit. There it was again. Choice, always the choice. Mavis referred me to a land use attorney in Corpus Christi named Hollister Venn, but his schedule was full and time was not kind. So she also walked me through the questions I needed answered before anyone could trap me. Did the trust transfer full ownership to me? Yes. Were there liens, taxes, but manageable? Was the access road part of the parcel? Yes, by old legal description and later county map. Could the restriction be released? Possibly, but only by the owner with county approval, and a public hearing would be required. Could I add new restrictions? If I was the record owner and not under court order, I could record a covenant limiting use, donate access control to a qualified nonprofit, or create a trust for public safety and shelter use. But be careful, Mavis said. If you rush and make a mess, Strake's lawyers will tear it apart. Clean beats fast, but clean and fast beats rich men who think slow paperwork belongs only to them. That became my rule. Clean and fast. Crew stopped being gentle the next day. He called while I was at the motel office, and this time, his voice had the hard edge I remembered from childhood, the one he used when he thought something was his, and someone smaller had touched it. I know you talked to Strake, he said. I asked why that mattered. Because you're in over your head. Mom and Dad never meant for you to make a decision like this alone. I almost smiled. The motel had been worthless when he thought it was mine. Now that it mattered, it had become a family decision. What decision? I asked. Don't play dumb, he snapped. That road is the key to the South Marsh project. There is real money on the table. Not little money, Savina. Real money. You need to be reasonable. I let him talk. People reveal themselves when they think they are teaching you. He said the resort would bring jobs. He said Saltwick needed development. He said our parents had been old and emotional. He said I could not let a few notebooks and a dying motel block progress. Then he said what he really meant. We can split this. I'll handle Strake. You'll get more than you would ever make digging through courthouse files. Everybody wins. I asked him what split he had in mind. He said 60-40. I asked which one I got. He sighed like I was being childish. Don't make this ugly. That sentence did something to me, not because it scared me, because I realized he already thought ugly was the natural shape of anything I refused to hand him. Penn arrived at the motel 2 days later, with flowers from a grocery store and a white shirt rolled at the sleeves, like he had dressed for a second chance. I saw his car pull in and almost laughed at the timing. He stepped out and looked around with a face full of concern he had not felt when the place was only mine. You shouldn't be here alone, he said. This building could be dangerous. I stood in the office doorway. You drove 4 hours to warn me about loose ceiling tiles? He looked wounded. Penn was good at looking wounded when he had hurt someone else. I was wrong, he said. About what? He swallowed. About how I spoke to you. About the motel. About us. I let him continue because silence is the best solvent for fake apologies. It melts them down to the metal. He said grief had made him cruel. He said he panicked. He said marriage was stressful. Then, slowly, he found his way to the road. He had heard there might be development interest. He had contacts. He had ideas. He said with his sales skills and my paperwork brain, we could turn this into something life-changing. We, our, together. The words came out polished and dead. I thought of the ring clicking on my kitchen counter. I thought of him saying he was tired of burdens. Penn, I said, when you thought I inherited debt, you left. When you heard I might control money, you came with flowers. That is not love. That is a weather report. His face flushed. That's unfair. No, I said. It is accurate. He stared at me like accuracy was a kind of betrayal. Then he set the flowers on the office counter and told me not to let bitterness make me stupid. I threw them in the dumpster after he left. Not dramatically, I just did not want them in my mother's office. Winta called me that night. I almost did not answer, but something in me was tired of hearing men explain my life, so I picked up. For the first few minutes, she sounded like a woman standing barefoot on broken glass. She told me Crew had overextended himself. The Miami house was beautiful, yes, but expensive. There were maintenance costs, insurance, tax adjustments, old debts I did not know about. She said the beach house did not solve as much as people thought. She said Crew was under pressure from people who had expected the Strake deal to move. He made promises, she whispered, before Mom died. He thought he was going to be able to deliver the road. My hand tightened around the phone. So he did know. Winta went quiet. Then she said, he knew enough. For a moment, I felt sorry for her. Not because she was innocent. She was not. She had sat in that lawyer's office and let Crew laugh. But panic had stripped the shine off her, and underneath she sounded exhausted. She talked about keeping appearances for their children, about school tuition, about the shame of admitting the beach house was not a rescue but a stage set. Then, like Vivian in a different life, she would never know, Winta turned the confession into a weapon. So, you understand, she said. You understand why he can't back down. This is not just greed, Savina. This is survival. I looked at the shelter logs on the motel desk. Names of people who had needed actual survival. A woman hiding from a violent husband. A family sleeping in a car after a flood. An old man waiting for oxygen. No, I said quietly. Greed does not become survival just because the greedy person is scared. She started crying then. I told her I was sorry for the children. I meant it. Then I hung up. The next morning I made my decision. Not because I was pure. I was not. I want that to be clear. There was a night when I sat in room 9 with Strake's latest offer in front of me and imagined signing it. The number was enough to erase every debt, buy a house anywhere I wanted, send Crew into a rage he would taste for years, and make Penn understand exactly what he had thrown away. I imagined walking into a restaurant in a dress I could not afford before and watching people make room for me. I imagined not worrying about medical bills, roof repairs, grocery prices, or whether my car would start. Anybody who says money cannot tempt them has either always had it or never had a real offer placed in front of their tired hands. So I let myself want it. I sat with the wanting until it stopped pretending to be justice. Then I opened the shelter logs again. I read my mother's handwriting. I read the names of people she protected without posting about it, without building a brand around kindness, without ever telling her children the full story because she did not believe pain should be used as family decoration. I walked out to the back road at sunset. The marsh shone gold. Birds moved low over the grass. The air smelled like salt, mud, and rain coming from somewhere far away. Beyond the marsh was the tract Strake wanted to carve into luxury. Private villas, a marina, gated roads, perfect lawns where water used to breathe. To sell that road, I would not just be selling asphalt and weeds. I would be selling the thing that had allowed my mother to keep a door open for people who had nowhere else to go. I called Mavis. I want to protect it, I said. Not negotiate. Protect. She did not ask whether I was sure. She only said, then we do it clean. The plan took shape over a week of long days and short sleep. Mavis brought in Hollister Venn for the land use filings, and Palmer Joss helped locate every public record we needed. Sula signed a sworn statement about the motel's shelter use and my mother's instructions. We created the Sunfall Safe Harbor Trust, a nonprofit structure with a narrow purpose, preserving the property's emergency refuge history, maintaining community access for storm response, and preventing transfer of the old ferry road for private resort development. I would donate the access control interest and record a restrictive covenant against the motel parcel. The covenant would not stop every possible future use, but it would block the use Strake needed most. Private luxury resort access through the Sunfall Road. It would also preserve Room 9 and part of the office as a documented historic shelter site. The language was careful, no drama, no revenge words, just restrictions, purposes, definitions, signatures, notary stamps, and the kind of boring sentences that can ruin a rich man's morning. There was risk. Crew could seek an injunction if he moved fast enough. Strake could file a notice of claim to scare the nonprofit away. Penn could lie about my state of mind if they tried to paint me as unstable. Every hour mattered, so we moved before they believed I would. Men like Crew and Cordell Strake expected women to cry first, ask questions second, and file documents last. They forgot I made my living reading the traps people hide in property records. They forgot I knew the courthouse opened at 8. The settlement demand arrived on a Monday. Crew's lawyer accused me of mismanaging a family asset, hiding material information, and acting under emotional distress after my broken engagement. That last part had Penn's fingerprints all over it. The letter demanded a meeting in San Antonio with all interested parties and warned that if I refused, they would seek emergency relief to prevent me from transferring or encumbering the motel property. I read it twice at the office counter while Sula made coffee strong enough to lift paint. "They think you still have it," she said. I nodded. "For now." She smiled without showing teeth. "Then stop having it." We filed the next morning, not just one paper. A stack, trust documents, donation instrument, access control assignment, restrictive covenant, historic use affidavit, emergency refuge statement, supporting exhibits, old deed, county acknowledgments, Sula's sworn statement. My mother's shelter logs copied and certified where needed, with private names protected. Mavis and Hollister checked every page. I signed until my hand ached. The notary stamped each signature with the steady rhythm of a door closing. Recording is not magic. People think legal documents become powerful the second you sign them. They do not. They have to land in the public record. They have to be accepted, indexed, and attached to the property, where future buyers, lawyers, lenders, and judges can see them. For 2 days, I lived with my phone in my hand. Crew called 9 times. I did not answer. Penn texted twice. Strake's office emailed a revised proposal with a number so large I had to sit down before I deleted it. Winta left a voicemail saying I was destroying her family. The city sent another unsafe structure notice. Rain came through the office ceiling near the back wall. I placed a bucket under it and kept waiting. On Thursday at 3:17 p.m., Mavis called. I answered before the first ring finished. "It's done," she said. "Recorded and indexed. The trust holds the access control interest. The covenant is on title. They can fight, but they cannot pretend it is not there." I stood behind the motel counter with my mother's guest bell in front of me and closed my eyes. I expected triumph. Instead, I felt grief, clean and deep. I had given away the thing that could have made me rich. I had also protected the thing that made my mother who she was. Both truths stood in the room with me, and neither canceled the other. The settlement meeting was the next morning in San Antonio, in a conference room nicer than the first one. Of course it was nicer. Cordell Strake was attending, and men like him prefer soft chairs when they threaten people. I wore a dark green dress my mother once said made me look like I knew where I was going. I carried one leather folder. Not a box, not a stack, one folder. Mavis walked beside me, calm as a locked gate. Hollister joined us by video, waiting to speak only if needed. They were all there when I arrived. Crew at the center of the table, jaw tight, trying to look like a family man wronged by a selfish sister. Winta beside him, pale and polished. Penn against the wall, pretending he was there as support when everyone knew he was there as ammunition. Cordell Strake sat near the window in a charcoal suit, no tie, silver hair perfect, hands folded like a patient priest of money. 2 lawyers sat beside him. Crew's lawyer had a stack of papers arranged in front of him with military care. I sat down. I placed my folder on the table. Crew looked at it and smirked. He thought one folder meant I was unprepared. That is the problem with people who confuse volume with power. Crew's lawyer began. He spoke for almost 15 minutes. He said my parents could not have intended for me to control an asset of such major commercial significance. He said I had hidden information from my brother. He said my recent breakup raised concerns about emotional decision-making. Penn looked down at the carpet with fake reluctance, as if he hated being part of this but would bravely lie if justice required it. Cordell Strake watched me with mild interest, like I was a weather pattern affecting construction. Crew's lawyer used phrases like family equity, asset preservation, reasonable development, and injunctive relief. He did not use the word greed. People rarely name the room they are standing in. Then Crew spoke, because he could never let a lawyer be the most important man at the table. "Savina, this has gone far enough," he said. "You wanted to make a point. Fine, you made it, but this is bigger than your feelings. This could change all our lives." I looked at him. It already did. He ignored that. Mom was sentimental. Dad was stubborn. They were not business people at the end. We have to be smarter than they were. Something in me went still when he said that. My parents had protected that place for decades, while Crew made secret promises with other men's money, and he still thought he was the smart one. Penn stepped forward next. I had expected it, but it still made my skin cool. "Savina, nobody wants to hurt you." he said, using the soft voice he once used after arguments when he wanted forgiveness without repair. But I saw how upset you were after the will reading. You were not yourself. Making a permanent decision right now could be something you regret forever. He let the words permanent decision hang in the air, not knowing the decision had already become public record. I almost admired the performance. Almost. Then Cordell Strake slid a document across the table. It was not a check, but it might as well have been. A purchase proposal revised upward, the number sat near the bottom of the page, clean and black and heavy. Ms. Holt, he said, I respect loyalty to family history, I truly do. But history does not repair roofs. It does not pay code fines. It does not create jobs. This proposal allows you to honor your mother's memory while also accepting reality. He leaned back. No one is asking you to erase the past. We are asking you not to let it strangle the future. That was a good line. I wondered who wrote it for him. Winta was the last to speak. Her eyes were wet, and this time I believed. The tears. Please, she said. I know Crew has made mistakes. I know things were handled badly, but our children did not do anything. This deal could save us. It could save their school, their home, everything. She reached across the table like she might touch my hand, then seemed to remember we were not close enough for that. Don't punish them, because you're angry at him. There it was. The whole room pressed toward me in 4 shapes. Law, blood, love, and money. A lawyer telling me I was unstable. A brother telling me I was selfish. An ex-fiancé telling me I was fragile. A developer telling me I was standing in the way of progress. A sister-in-law asking me to turn my mother's shelter into her children's rescue plan. For 1 second, I felt tired enough to understand how people give in. Not because they agree, because pressure is heavy, and peace can look like signing the page someone else prepared. I opened my folder. Nobody here is going to build a resort through the Sunfall Road, I said. Crew made a sound under his breath. His lawyer started to interrupt. Mavis lifted one hand, and for some reason he stopped. I slid the first document into the center of the table. This is the recorded restrictive covenant for the Sunfall Motor Court parcel. It was accepted and indexed yesterday. It limits the Old Ferry Road to emergency refuge support, ordinary motel restoration, public safety access, and non-profit shelter operations. It bars private resort access, luxury residential construction traffic, and commercial marina development through that strip. Cordell Strake did not move, but one of his lawyers leaned forward. I placed the second document beside the first. This is the donation of access control interest to the Sunfall Safe Harbor Trust. I no longer personally control the release you need. The trust purpose is narrow. It cannot approve the use your project requires without violating its own governing documents. Crew's face changed before he understood enough to hide it. You did what? He said. I placed the third document down. This is the historic use affidavit with county acknowledgments and shelter records. It documents the motel's use as an emergency refuge and temporary safe lodging site over multiple storms and private crises. Some names are sealed for privacy. The county record now reflects the use history your team kept calling sentimental. Crew's lawyer picked up the first page, then the second. He did not pick up the third. He had already understood the shape of the damage. I turned to Cordell. Your project needed a door. My parents owned it. Then I owned it. Now it is locked in a trust built for the people my mother spent years helping. You can sue, you can delay, you can spend money punishing paper, but you cannot make me sign a release I no longer have the power to give you. The room went silent. Not the polite silence from the will reading. This silence had weight. It had math collapsing inside it. Crew stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. You gave it away? He said. His voice cracked on the last word. You gave away millions of dollars because of some old notebooks? I looked at him and remembered him laughing in Mavis's office. I remembered him saying I liked sad little projects. No, I said. I gave away your ability to sell what was never yours. He pointed at me. You had no right. I was the record owner, I said. That is what you all kept forgetting. When the motel was a burden, it was mine. When it became valuable, suddenly it was family. You do not get to change ownership because your opinion changed. Cordell Strake finally stood. He buttoned his jacket with slow, careful hands. His face gave away almost nothing, but his eyes had gone flat. This is unfortunate, he said. I believe that was the strongest curse his class of man allowed in public. He gathered his proposal. One of his lawyers whispered something to him. He shook his head once. The whisper stopped. He looked at Crew, not at me. You represented that family cooperation was likely? Crew's mouth opened, but no words came out fast enough. Strake turned and walked out. His people followed. Just like that, the biggest man in the room became the first one to leave because there was no prophet left to sit beside. Penn tried next because Penn could not stand being irrelevant. Savina, this is insane. You threw away your future. I looked at him for the last time with the kind of sadness that has no wish inside it. No, Penn. I threw away the future you wanted to return for. His face tightened. You're making me the villain because I told you the truth. You told me my inheritance made me a burden, I said. Then you came back when the burden looked expensive. That is not truth. That is price checking. He looked around as if someone might defend him. Nobody did. Winta began crying quietly. Crew was still standing, still red, still trying to turn loss into anger because anger felt more powerful than fear. Mom would be ashamed of you, he said. That one reached me, not because I believed it, but because he had chosen it, knowing it was the sharpest tool left. I took the shelter log copy from my folder and opened to a page from 12 years earlier. This is Mom's handwriting, I said. A woman came in after midnight with 2 children and a split lip. Mom put them in room 9. She wrote, "No questions until morning. Let them sleep first." I turned another page. A family lost their trailer in a flood. Room 4. No charge. Another. An old man's oxygen machine failed during a power outage. Office couch. Sula called the clinic. I closed the notebook. You looked at that place and saw mold. Mom looked at it and saw doors. I protected the doors, so do not sit there in your expensive suit and tell me what would shame her. Cruz sank back into his chair like something inside him had been cut. For a moment, he looked less like my brother and more like a boy who had spent his whole life measuring love with the wrong ruler and was only now discovering the numbers did not work. The meeting ended without a settlement. It ended the way these things often do when the money leaves first, with lawyers speaking softly, papers sliding back into folders, and people avoiding each other's eyes. Crew did not apologize. Penn did not apologize. Winta did not speak to me as I passed her chair, but she touched the shelter log with 2 fingers before pulling her hand back. I do not know what that meant. Maybe nothing. Maybe some part of her understood that her children's fear did not outrank everyone else's shelter. Maybe she only understood that the deal was dead. Outside, the San Antonio heat wrapped around me like a wet towel. Mavis walked beside me to the parking lot. You know they may still sue, she said. I know. You know it may still cost you. I looked at the folder in my hand. It felt lighter now. It already did. She nodded. Your mother picked the right person. I shook my head. My mother left me a choice. I picked who I wanted to be. The fallout was not loud. Real consequences rarely arrive with music. They arrive through emails, missed calls, unpaid invoices, and houses listed sooner than expected. Straight Coastal Group paused the South Marsh project within 2 weeks, then announced a strategic redesign that fooled nobody who understood access maps. Crew's side money dried up. His lawyer withdrew from the trust challenge after reviewing the recorded covenant and realizing there was no easy fortune left to chase. The Miami beach house went on the market by fall. Crew told relatives it was because the insurance was unreasonable. Maybe that was partly true. People like Crew prefer explanations that leave out mirrors. Penn sent one long email full of regret, memory, and careful sentences about how love can be complicated when grief is involved. I did not answer, not because I hated him. Hatred is a relationship, and I was finished giving him one. Winta sent a small note months later. It said only, I read one of the pages. I understand more now. I kept it in a drawer but did not respond. Some bridges do not need to be burned. Some can simply be left without maintenance until grass grows over both ends. I stayed in Saltwick longer than I planned. The city still wanted repairs. The roof still leaked. The pool was still a cracked blue wound in the center of the parking lot. Protecting a place does not make it pretty overnight. That is something stories often skip. Paperwork can stop destruction, but it cannot replace plumbing. So I worked. I took client jobs remotely, spent mornings in county offices, afternoons meeting contractors, evenings in the motel office with old fans moving warm air around. Sula came most days and insulted the coffee no matter who made it. Palmer found grants. Mavis helped connect the trust with a coastal nonprofit that actually knew how to run emergency lodging. A church group from 2 towns over repaired 3 rooms. A retired electrician rewired the office because, as he put it, Dovey once let his sister hide there, and he had been waiting years to repay somebody. Room 9 stayed locked until we could restore it properly. Not as a museum of pain. My mother would have hated that, but as a record of mercy. We preserved the guest bell, the bluebonnet vase, copies of the logs with names removed, and a photograph of the motel when it was bright and new. On the wall near the desk, I framed one line from my mother's letter. Money will speak loudly. Let people speak first. The first night we reopened 3 rooms, a storm came in from the Gulf. Not a hurricane, just hard rain, mean wind, flooded roads, the kind of weather that reminds coastal towns they are always negotiating with water. Around midnight, a sheriff's deputy brought an elderly couple whose car had stalled near the low bridge. They were soaked, embarrassed, and apologizing for needing help, as if need was bad manners. I gave them room 3. Sula brought towels. The old guest bell sat on the counter between us, polished clean. After they went to their room, I stood in the office and listened to rain hit the roof we had barely fixed in time. For the first time since the will reading, I felt my mother close, without feeling the ache of losing her. Not gone. Not exactly there. More like a light left on in a place I had finally entered. Crew and I did not become close. That is not the kind of ending this story earned. He called once, months later, after the Miami house sold. He sounded smaller, though maybe that was just distance. He said he had been angry. He said he had not understood what Mom was doing with the motel. He did not say he was sorry for laughing. He did not say he was sorry for working with Strake behind my back. He said, I guess you always were better at that paperwork stuff. It was the nearest thing to respect he knew how to offer. I accepted it for what it was and did not pretend it was more. Boundaries are easier when you stop asking limited people to become fluent in the language of repair. I went back to San Antonio once to clear out my old apartment. The ring Penn had left behind was still in the kitchen drawer where I had dropped it after he refused to take it. I sold it and used the money to replace the Sunfall office windows. That felt fair. Every morning after the glass went in, sunlight came through clean and gold, catching the dust in the air like tiny sparks. Sula said the windows looked too fancy. I told her to suffer through improvement. She smiled for almost a full second. By the next spring, the Sunfall Motor Court was not beautiful, but it was alive. 6 rooms safe, office open, back road gated, marked and available for emergency access under the trust rules. The pool filled in and turned into a courtyard with gravel, native grass, and 2 benches. The neon sign still did not work, but we repaired the frame and painted the sun. I thought about fixing the lights, then decided to wait. Some things should return slowly so everyone can see the work. People sometimes ask whether I regret giving away the access rights. They ask carefully, usually after hearing the number attached to Strake's offer. They expect me to say no in a clean, heroic way, but regret is not always that simple. There are hard mornings when the bank account is thin, the roof needs another repair, and I remember exactly how many zeros were on that proposal. I am not made of stone. I know what money can do. I know what it can save. But I also know what it can erase when people treat every locked door as an invitation to buy the key. My parents did not leave me wealth in the way Crew understood wealth. They left me responsibility disguised as failure. They left me a place people mocked, so I could decide whether mockery was enough to make me throw it away. The truth is, my brother got the beach house. I got the broken motel. On paper, he won that morning in San Antonio. Everyone in the room saw it. Even I saw it for a moment. But paper is only as honest as the person reading it, and there was more paper waiting in room 9. Old deeds, shelter logs, offer letters, my mother's handwriting, my father's red pencil under the sentence everyone else missed. The abandoned motel was not a punishment. It was a question. What do you protect when selling it would prove everyone wrong? My answer is still standing on the edge of Saltwick, Texas. Orange doors, clean windows, a painted sun, a bell on the counter, a road behind it that no resort will ever own. And sometimes, when rain comes hard from the Gulf and someone knocks after midnight with fear on their face, I understand my mother better than I ever did when she was alive. She was not keeping a business. She was keeping a promise. That is my story. My parents left me in an abandoned motel in Texas, and my brother got a $3 million beach house in Miami. He laughed because he thought the better life had been handed to him. My fiancé left because he thought my future had no value. A developer smiled because he thought every old thing had a price if he found the right pressure point. They were all wrong in different ways, but they were wrong about the same thing. Worth is not always what someone will pay you. Sometimes worth is what you refuse to sell. If someone has ever measured you by the thing you received, the money you did not have, the room you were not invited into, or the life they thought you could never build, remember this. People can laugh at the outside of a gift and still never understand what is hidden inside it. Let them laugh. Let them talk. Let them show you who they are. Then read the paperwork, hold your line, and protect the part of yourself they were hoping you would trade away. Drop your thoughts below, share this with someone who needs a quiet kind of courage tonight, and subscribe for more stories where the truth does not shout, but it still wins. The end.